When Jimmy Cliff's last Instagram post went up on November 12th, showing him smiling in his iconic Harder They Come costume, nobody knew it would be the final glimpse fans got of the legend alive. Just 12 days later, his wife Latifah would use that same platform to announce he'd crossed over after a seizure and pneumonia. But here's what nobody's talking about. The timing of his death mirrors the curse that haunts reggae's greatest pioneers. Toots Hibbert died in 2020. Bob Marley passed in 1981. Peter Tosh shot dead in 1987. And now Jimmy Cliff joins them. The man who did it all first, who opened every door, who never got the respect he deserved because one contract fight handed his crown to someone else. The untold story of how Island Records betrayed him reveals why reggae's true founding father died in Bob Marley's shadow. It's with profound sadness that I share that my husband, Jimmy Cliff, has crossed over due to a seizure followed by pneumonia, his wife Latifah Chambers wrote on Instagram Monday. According to the American Lung Association, pneumonia can usually be treated successfully. However, it can be fatal in some cases, especially if the patient is over the age of 65. At 81, Cliff's body couldn't fight off what younger patients might survive. I am thankful for his family, friends, fellow artists, and co-workers who have shared his journey with him, Chambers continued. To all his fans around the world, please know that your support was his strength throughout his whole career. He really appreciated each and every fan for their love. I also wanted to thank Dr. Cusiero and the whole medical staff, as they have been extremely supportive and helpful during this difficult process, she wrote. Jimmy, my darling, may you rest in peace. I will follow your wishes. The message was signed by Cliff's wife Latifah and their two children Lilty and Aiken. The last post on Cliff's official Instagram page was uploaded on November 12, a throwback photo of Cliff on the set of The Harder They Come. That final post feels prophetic now, Cliff literally showing the world his most iconic role just days before leaving it forever. Jimmy Cliff was born James Chambers on 30th July 1944 in St. James, colony of Jamaica, the second to last of 9 children. He began writing songs while still at primary school in St. James, listening to a neighbor's sound system. When Chambers was 14, his father took him to Kingston, where he would take up the stage name Jimmy Cliff. The move from rural poverty to Kingston paralleled the plot of The Harder They Come so perfectly that the film later felt like his autobiography. Cliff sought out many producers while still going to school, trying to get his songs recorded without success. He also entered talent contests. One night, I was walking past a record store and restaurant as they were closing, pushed myself in, and convinced one of them, Leslie Kong, to go into the recording business, starting with me, Cliff wrote in his own website biography. That audacious move, forcing his way into a closing restaurant and convincing a stranger to become a music producer, shows the fearless hustle that defined his entire career. After 2 singles that failed to make much impression, his career took off when Hurricane Hattie became a hit while he was age 17. It was produced by Kong, with whom Cliff remained until Kong's death from a heart attack in 1971. Along with Toots and the Maytals, credited with coining the term reggae with their 1968 single Do the Reggae, Cliff was among the first Jamaican artists whose music was released through a partnership with Kingston label Beverly's and Island Records. That partnership with Island would define and ultimately curse his career. In 1967, Cliff's debut Island LP, Hard Road to Travel, arrived, followed 2 years later by his self-titled 1969 LP, later renamed Wonderful World, Beautiful People. The 1969 album boasted 2 songs that ultimately led to Cliff's breakout and made him reggae's first global superstar, the anti-war anthem Vietnam, and one of Cliff's most enduring works, Many Rivers to Cross. Cliff's song Vietnam was declared by Bob Dylan to be the greatest protest song ever written, according to Cliff's website. When Bob Dylan, one of history's most celebrated songwriters, calls your work the greatest protest song ever created, that's validation most artists never receive. Yet somehow, Cliff never became a household name the way Dylan did, the way Marley did, the way so many artists he influenced eventually did. The following year, 1970, brought two more hits. Cliff's rendition of Cat Stevens' then just-released Wild World, as well as You Can Get It If You Really Want. The success overseas put Cliff back in the spotlight in his native Jamaica, where filmmaker Perry Hensel was working on a crime film about the Rude Boys of Kingston. That film became The Harder They Come, and it changed everything. Cliff starred as Ivan, a country boy arriving in Kingston with dreams of music stardom, who gets exploited by the industry and turns to crime. The parallels to Cliff's own journey weren't accidental. He'd fought the same battles Ivan fought, confronted the same barriers, felt the same rage at a system designed to keep poor Jamaican artists poor. Cliff was born James Chambers in suburban St. James, and like Ivan Martin and The Harder They Come, moved to Kingston in his youth to become a musician. In the early 1960s, Jamaica was gaining its independence from Britain, and the early sounds of reggae, first called ska and rocksteady, were catching on. Calling himself Jimmy Cliff, he had a handful of local hits, including King of Kings and Miss Jamaica. And after overcoming the kinds of barriers that upended Martin, was called on to help represent his country at the 1964 World's Fair in New York City. That World's Fair appearance put him on an international stage, while most Jamaican artists were still unknown outside their island. You Can Get It If You Really Want, and the title song, were calls for action and vows of final payments. The harder they come, the harder they fall, one and all. Cliff otherwise lets out a weary cry on Many Rivers to Cross, a gospel-style testament that he wrote after confronting racism in England in the 1960s. It was a very frustrating time. I came to England with very big hopes, and I saw my hopes fading, he told Rolling Stone in 2012. That song became his signature, the one track that perfectly captured the struggle of crossing rivers, climbing mountains, facing obstacles that seemed insurmountable, yet somehow finding the strength to continue. The Harder They Come soundtrack sold millions worldwide, introducing reggae to audiences who'd never heard the genre before. The film became a cult classic, screening in midnight movie theaters for years, building Cliff into an underground icon. He was reggae's biggest star, the genre's ambassador to the world, the man who'd opened every door. Then everything fell apart because of one contract dispute. Cliff wanted more money, more creative control, more respect from Island Records and Chris Blackwell. The negotiations went nowhere. Frustrated and feeling exploited, Cliff made the decision that would haunt his legacy forever. He left Island and signed with rival label EMI. The moment Cliff walked out, Chris Blackwell signed another Jamaican artist Cliff knew from his teenage years, Bob Marley. Island poured all their resources into Marley, gave him the support and promotion Cliff had begged for, and turned him into the biggest reggae star the world has ever known. Suddenly, Cliff wasn't reggae's ambassador anymore. He was the guy who left right before everything exploded. Marley became synonymous with reggae itself, while Cliff watched from the sidelines, the pioneer who did everything first but got none of the credit. The bitterness must have been overwhelming, watching your friend achieve the success that should have been yours because you had the audacity to ask for fair treatment. In 1976, Cliff sang on the first season of Saturday Night Live, episode 12, hosted by Dick Cavett. After a series of albums, Cliff took a break and traveled to Africa. Cliff quickly returned to music, touring for several years before he recorded with Kool and the Gang. During the River Tour, Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band added Cliff's previously little-known song Trapped to their live set. It achieved great prominence when included on 1985's We Are the World benefit album. That Springsteen endorsement
proved major artists still recognized Cliff's genius, even if mainstream audiences had moved on. At the same time, the likes of Bruce Springsteen and Willie Nelson have recorded versions of his songs. Cliff was known for songs like I Can See Clearly Now and You Can Get It If You Really Want. In 1991, Cliff performed at the second Rock in Rio Festival in Estádio do Maracanã in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He continued to sell well in Jamaica and, to a lesser extent, the UK, returning to mainstream pop charts in the US and elsewhere with a version of Johnny Nash's I Can See Clearly Now on the Cool Runnings film soundtrack in 1993. That Cool Runnings cover became his biggest American hit in years, introducing his voice to a whole new generation of kids who had no idea they were listening to a legend. In 1995, Cliff released the single Hakuna Matata, a collaboration with Lebo M., a song from the soundtrack of the film The Lion King. Disney money kept him relevant, even as the industry forgot what he'd accomplished. In 2010, Cliff was inducted into the Rock and Roll's Hall of Fame, becoming the second Jamaican ever to achieve that honor. The first was Bob Marley. Even in the Hall of Fame, he came second to Marley. He was inducted in 2010 with an introductory speech from Wyclef Jean. An essay commemorating Cliff from writer Rob Bowman said that if he had done nothing but star in The Harder They Come, he would have merited inclusion.
When we saw Jimmy Cliff, we saw ourselves, Wyclef Jean said of the singer's legacy in his speech inducting Cliff into the Rock Hall. As I looked at Jimmy Cliff, I saw my face, and this is what Jimmy Cliff represents. Not just to me from the ghetto, but I think all of the kids that come from rural areas. So thank you, Jimmy Cliff, for being an inspiration to all our lives. That tribute captures what Cliff meant to people who saw themselves in his journey from poverty to global stages. In 2012, 2 years after Cliff was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he released what became his swan song, Rebirth, an LP that recaptured the sound of his 70s glory days, thanks in part to production and songwriting by Rancid's Tim Armstrong. The album earned Cliff his second Grammy Award for Best Reggae Album. Cliff would release one final album, 2022's Refugees. At 78 years old, he was still recording, still creating, still refusing to fade away. After a creative resurgence in 2012 with the Grammy-winning album Rebirth, Cliff said, according to his website, "Now I feel I have not completed what I am here on this planet to do. I have to say what I have to say and do what I have to do via music and films. Every morning I wake up, that keeps me going." Those words reveal a man still driven, still hungry, still feeling like he had more to prove, even after 6 decades in the industry. At the time of his death, he was the only living reggae musician to hold the Order of Merit, Jamaica's highest honor for achievements in the arts and sciences. Jamaica gave him their highest honor, yet the world never quite gave him his due. Tributes poured in from the musical world, including many from artists whom Cliff inspired. A true foundation, a pillar of our music, and one of the first to carry reggae out into the world, Ali Campbell of the British reggae group UB40 said in a message on X. In September 2020, Cliff eulogized his late friend Toots Hibbert for Rolling Stone in a way that echoed his own legacy. From our religious background, our concept of when someone cross over, we don't say they pass away, we say cross over. They just go to the other side of existence. There's no such thing as death. And then they go out there and they vibrate for however many days before they go to a higher height, Cliff said. But Toots, the way Toots lived his life, I'm sure his soul got to move on. The soul can reincarnate from 24 to 24,000 times. It depends how you lived your life. Now Toots and Jimmy have both crossed over, 2 pioneers who created reggae, gone within 5 years of each other. Despite his love of acting and his well-received Harder They Come performance, Cliff had sporadic appearances on the big screen in the decades that followed, making cameos in the Robin Williams comedy Club Paradise and the Steven Seagal action film Marked for Death.
There were some other roles that came up, but I didn't really see myself playing them, so I said no to them, Cliff said of his movie career.
The cruel mathematics of Jimmy Cliff's career are undeniable. He was reggae's first global superstar before Bob Marley existed on the world stage. He wrote protest songs Bob Dylan called the greatest ever created. He starred in the film that brought reggae to international audiences. He influenced Bruce Springsteen, Willie Nelson, Paul Simon, and countless others. He won 2 Grammys, got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, received Jamaica's highest honor. Yet he died in Bob Marley's shadow, forever introduced as the star of The Harder They Come, rather than simply as Jimmy Cliff, legend. That contract dispute with Island Records changed music history. If Cliff had stayed, would Marley have gotten his shot? Would reggae have exploded the same way? Would Cliff be remembered as the genre's greatest ambassador instead of living in Marley's enormous shadow? Those questions can never be answered, but they haunted Cliff for decades as he watched the success that should have been his go to someone else. Jimmy Cliff crossed over Monday morning after a seizure and pneumonia, joining Toots Hibbert, Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Bunny Wailer, and so many other reggae pioneers who've left us. His wife Latifah, children Lilty and Aiken, and millions of fans worldwide now mourn a man who never stopped fighting, never stopped creating, never believing in reggae's power to transform lives. The legacy he leaves isn't just in his songs or his film, but in every artist who saw themselves in his journey, from rural Jamaica to global stages. When Wyclef Jean looked at Jimmy Cliff, he saw his own face. When poor kids from rural areas heard "Many Rivers to Cross," they heard their own struggles validated. That's the real measure of greatness, not Grammy Awards or Hall of Fame plaques, but the lives you touched and the doors you opened for others to walk through. Jimmy Cliff opened every door, then watched others walk through them to greater glory. That's the tragedy and the glory.